I was 34 years old, a licensed paralegal with 11 years of experience reading other people's paperwork, and I still didn't see it coming from my own father. That is the part that stays with you. Not the loss itself. You can grieve a loss. You can sit with it, name it, fold it up and put it somewhere manageable. What you cannot easily fold up is the moment you realize the person who taught you to shake hands firmly and look people in the eye had been telling a story about you for years. A story in which you were the one who walked away. My name is Renata Elise Calloway. I grew up in Harwick County, in a house that smelled like linseed oil and old newspaper, and I spent the better part of my adult life believing that my father was simply a man of his era, cautious with money, quieter with praise, more comfortable with my brother than with me, but not cruel. Not deliberately. Not on purpose. I was wrong about that. And the proof was in his own handwriting. Welcome back to the channel, where we sit with the stories that took years to understand, and even longer to say out loud. I'm glad you're here. Before I tell you what I found, I need to tell you what was in that house, and what it cost me to leave it the first time. My grandfather, my father's father, Elmore Calloway, built a modest parcel of property outside Dunfield, on the western edge of the county, over the course of about 30 years. He wasn't a wealthy man by any standard that would impress anyone at a dinner table. He was a man who bought 1 acre at a time when he could afford it, paid cash when he could, financed when he had to, and kept every single document in a metal strongbox that sat on the top shelf of his bedroom closet behind a stack of Field and Stream magazines from 1987. Grandpa Elmore died on a Tuesday in late October. He was 81. He had been sick for 2 years and not sick for 79 before that, and the balance of the man was still, even now, on the right side of the ledger. He was the kind of person who remembered the names of your friends from elementary school and asked about them decades later. He was the kind of person who pressed a folded bill into your hand at the end of every visit and said, "For the road," even when you were a grown woman who didn't need it. I have his pocket watch now. A Waltham Railroad grade from 1952, the case worn smooth on the left side where he used to rub it with his thumb when he was thinking. After he died, I started carrying it in my own coat pocket. I don't open it most days. I just feel for it, the weight of it, the warmth it takes on from being close to a body, and that is enough. Some things don't need to be opened to do their work. You carry them, and they carry you back. That is what I've learned about grief. It doesn't ask for much. It just wants to be held. The receipt, the document at the center of all of this. I need to tell you when it first appeared because its appearance is the whole story. I found it on a Thursday morning, 6:12 a.m., in the back of the bottom drawer of my father's old roll-top desk, which had been moved to my brother Marcus's garage after our father retired and consolidated the house on Pelham Street. I was not supposed to be looking through that desk. I was supposed to be helping Marcus sort boxes for a donation run. I opened the bottom drawer because it was the only one stuck, and I unstuck it because I was someone who could not leave a stuck drawer alone. Inside, beneath a rubber-banded packet of old utility receipts from the 1990s and a pocket calendar from 2003, there was a single folded piece of lined notebook paper. It had been folded in thirds, the way you fold a letter to put in an envelope. My father's handwriting, blocky, slightly left-leaning, the capital letters always a little larger than necessary, covered most of one side. I didn't unfold it fully. Not that morning. I read the first 2 lines, felt the floor shift beneath me, and put it in my coat pocket beside Grandpa Elmore's watch. I drove to the Sunoco on Route 9 outside Dunfield, sat in the parking lot with the engine running, and did not cry. My throat closed around something that had no name yet, and I held the steering wheel with both hands, and I waited for the feeling to pass enough that I could think straight. It took about 20 minutes. Here is who I was before any of this, so you understand the shape of the blind spot. I had worked at Creston and Fairweather Legal Associates in Millhaven for 11 years. I started as a file clerk at 22, worked into a paralegal certificate by 25, and by the time I was 30, I was the person the associates called when they needed document review done correctly the first time. I had read thousands of estate files. I had sat across from families in grief and helped them understand what the language in a will actually meant versus what they believed it meant. I was good at this. I was calm in rooms where other people were not calm. What I was not good at, what I had no training for, no credential to protect me from, was reading my own family's paperwork. That is a different kind of literacy entirely. And my father had understood that long before I did. My father, Gerald Calloway, was the oldest of Elmore's two sons. He had run a small equipment rental business in Harwick County for 26 years, the kind of operation held together by reputation and routine more than any formal infrastructure. Gerald was a man who knew which favors to call in and which ones to extend, who understood that information was currency and that controlling a story was worth more than correcting one. He was not a villain in the way that word gets used casually. He was a man who had decided, somewhere in the middle of his life, that the family's resources belonged to the family's future, and that the future, in his accounting, ran through Marcus. My brother was the son who had stayed in the county, who had worked summers at the equipment yard, who had married locally and bought a house 4 miles from the family property. I had left for Millhaven at 22 and built a life that was, in my father's private language, a kind of abandonment. He never said that to me directly. He said it to everyone else. Renata made her choice. He told my Aunt Phyllis at a family reunion when I was 28, not knowing I was standing on the other side of the screen door.
She's got her own life now.
That's fine. Marcus is the one who stayed. I didn't push the door open. I didn't answer. I went back to the picnic table and ate potato salad and talked to my cousin about her new job and let the sentence dissolve into the afternoon. That was the first time I understood something was being arranged without me. For 3 years before Grandpa Elmore got sick, I drove the hour and 40 minutes from Millhaven to Dunfield every third weekend to sit with him on the porch and listen to him talk. I did that every third weekend through his first winter of illness and into his second. I did that for the last time in September, 6 weeks before he died, when he was mostly sleeping and only sometimes himself. For 2 years before Grandpa Elmore died, I coordinated his medical paperwork, organized his pharmacy deliveries, and sat on hold with his supplemental insurance provider for an average of 40 minutes per call so that he wouldn't have to. I did that on my lunch breaks, from the parking garage at Creston and Fairweather, eating a sandwich over the steering wheel. For 18 months before the estate was settled, I answered every phone call my father made when he had a question about deed language or probate procedure, because Gerald Calloway was not going to pay an attorney for information his daughter could give him for free. I gave it freely. That was what you did. For the 6 weeks after the funeral, I helped my Aunt Lorraine, Elmore's sister, 83 years old and still living alone in her house on Cutter Road, near the Millhaven County line, go through Grandpa's personal effects, sorting what should stay in the family from what could be donated. I did that on weekends. I drove. I lifted. I labeled. I made the calls to the donation center on Hargrove Avenue and arranged the pickup. During the year before Grandpa Elmore's final hospitalization, I maintained his property records, filed the annual homestead exemption paperwork on his behalf, and confirmed twice that his name remained the sole recorded owner on all 4 parcels with the Harwick County Assessor's Office. I knew how to do those things. I did them because he asked me to, and because no one else in the family thought to. In the 3 months before his death, I sat with Grandpa Elmore on 4 separate weekends while Marcus took his family on a trip to the lake house, so that Elmore would not be alone. I brought him peach ice cream from the Dairy Dream on Route 9 because it was the only thing he said he still wanted. I watched him eat it in slow, careful spoonfuls and told him about nothing important, because nothing important was what he needed. I did all of these things quietly, without announcement, without keeping a list. I did not know then that someone else was keeping one. After the funeral, after the first attorney meeting, after the phone call from my father in which he explained, in the tone he used for things he had already decided, that Grandpa Elmore's estate was being consolidated into a single trust administered by Marcus, my father said this. "You walked away from this family, Renata. You made that clear a long time ago. There's nothing in the estate that needs your signature. It was already handled." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "Okay, Dad," and I put the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood at my apartment window in Millhaven, looking at the water tower on the hill behind the Sunoco sign, and I breathed. My chest was tight in a way that made it hard to fill my lungs completely. My hands, when I looked at them, were very still, which sometimes happens when everything underneath is not. I believed him. I believed that I had missed something, that some document had been signed or amended, that my absence from the county had translated, somehow, into legal absence from the record. I had seen it happen in estate files. I had explained to other people how it happened. I believed it had happened to me. For 8 months, I believed my father's story about me. Then I unstuck a drawer. The first family meeting after Grandpa Elmore's funeral was held at my Aunt Phyllis's house on Sycamore Bend Road, 11 days after the burial. Phyllis had a dining room table that seated 12, and she had set it with the good dishes, which I remember thinking was a strange choice for grief. The good dishes were for celebration. But maybe that was the point, and I just didn't understand yet whose celebration it was. My father arrived before anyone else and stood at the head of the table before anyone had suggested he should. That was Gerald Calloway's way. Not aggressive, never loud, just already in position when you arrived, so that the arrangement felt natural rather than chosen. Marcus sat to his left. Marcus's wife, Donna, sat beside Marcus. My Aunt Lorraine was at the far end, small in her good wool coat, her hands folded on the table in front of her. My cousin Bev was there. My cousin Terence. My Uncle Harold, who was Phyllis's husband and had the quality of a man who attended things without participating in them. I sat in the middle of one side, between Bev and an empty chair. Phyllis brought coffee in the percolator she only used for company and set it on a trivet in the center of the table, and for a few minutes everyone poured and stirred, and the room had the texture of something ordinary. Then my father set a manila folder on the table and folded his hands on top of it. "I want to talk through Dad's estate," he said. "So everyone understands where things stand, and there aren't any questions later." He said it the way you say something that is already finished, not an opening, a summary. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. The ceramic was hot enough to be uncomfortable, and I held it anyway. "The property," my father said, "is being consolidated. All 4 parcels, the equipment, the account at Harwick Savings and Loan. Everything goes into a single trust. Marcus will administer it. That keeps it in the family and keeps it intact, which is what Dad would have wanted." Bev nodded. Terence nodded. Harold looked at his coffee. Aunt Lorraine said, "Was that in Elmore's will, Gerald?" My father smiled at her. It was a patient smile, the kind you give someone you have decided in advance not to argue with. "It's consistent with his intentions," he said. "We had conversations over the years. He and I understood each other." Lorraine looked at her hands. The silence after that sat on the table like a third dish no one had ordered. I said, "What about the original will? Was it probated?" My father looked at me. Not sharply, that was never his style. He looked at me the way you look at someone who has asked a question you were prepared for. "The will was straightforward," he said. "The estate passes to me as the surviving son. I'm choosing to put it in trust for Marcus. That's my right." "I understand that," I said. "I'm asking if the will was filed with the probate court." "Everything was handled correctly, Renata." "I'm not suggesting it wasn't. I'm asking a procedural question." Marcus set his coffee cup down. He had his father's quality of stillness, my brother, but where my father's stillness came from certainty, Marcus's came from discomfort. He did not like direct exchanges. He preferred the world to be already settled when he arrived in it. "Renata," Marcus said, "nobody is trying to exclude you from anything. This is just how Dad wanted it done." I didn't answer that. I looked at Marcus for a moment, and then I looked back at my father, and I said, "Okay." My father nodded once, as if I had agreed to something. I had not agreed to anything, but I let him have the nod. Nobody spoke for a moment. Phyllis refilled the percolator. The sound of it burbling into the silence was the only thing in the room. I set my cup down. I looked at the manila folder under my father's hands. Then I looked at the window. Aunt Lorraine spoke again. "I'd still like to see the will," she said. "Elmore was careful about his paperwork. I think he would want it handled by the book." My father looked at her with the same patient expression he had used before. "Lorraine," he said, "I know this is hard. Losing Dad is hard for all of us. But the legal side is being managed properly. You don't need to worry about that." "I'm not worried," Lorraine said. "I'd just like to see it." The silence that followed was a different kind, not empty, but braced. My father picked up his coffee cup. He took a slow sip. I'll have copies made, he said, for anyone who wants them. He did not say when. He did not say by whom. He moved the conversation to the equipment yard instead, which of the rentals were still under contract, which ones had been returned, and the room followed him there because the room had always followed Gerald Calloway when he decided to move. I watched Lorraine fold her hands back on the table. She did not push further. But she had asked. She had asked twice, and I had heard her, and I stored it the way I stored everything in rooms like that one, quietly, without marking it, until I needed it. The second conversation happened 6 weeks later, in the parking lot of the First Methodist Church in Dunfield after a Sunday service I had driven down for specifically to see Aunt Lorraine. My father found me at my car before I could reach her. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, rocking slightly on his heels the way he did when he was about to say something he had rehearsed. I've been talking to some of the family, he said, about the estate, about how things were divided. Okay, I said. I want you to understand that what I told people is accurate. You had the opportunity to be involved in this family's decisions for a long time. You chose a different path. That's not a criticism. It's just the truth. The cold went through my coat. Not the weather. The air was mild for November, but something that moved through me regardless, starting at the back of my neck. What exactly did you tell them? I asked.
That you signed off, he said.
Years ago. That you made it clear the property wasn't something you wanted to be part of. I told them you walked away voluntarily. I looked at my father's face. I looked at it the way I looked at documents, carefully, without hurry, reading for what was underneath the surface language. I never signed anything, I said. He held my eyes for a moment. Then he said, "Memory is funny, Renata. People remember things differently."
He said it warmly.
He said it the way you say something you have decided is kind. I stood in that parking lot with my keys in my hand and did not move. Okay, Dad, I said. He patted my arm once, the way you pat a door frame on your way through, and walked back toward the church entrance. I stood beside my car for a long time after he went inside. The parking lot was emptying around me, families walking to their cars, children running ahead, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Sunday, and I stood in the middle of it without moving until the cold found its way through my coat completely. I had driven the hour and 40 minutes from Millhaven that morning to see Aunt Lorraine, and I had not seen her. She had been inside the church the whole time, and by the time my father walked away from me, the last of the congregation was filtering out, and I had missed my window, and the drive back would be empty. I found Lorraine in the church vestibule, pulling on her good coat. She was 83 and moved like someone who had learned to take her time with all motion, careful and deliberate, and when she saw me, she held both my hands in hers and did not say anything for a moment.
He found you outside, she said.
He did. She looked at me. Something in her face was very still. Did he say anything worth remembering? He said memory is funny, I said. Lorraine was quiet. She buttoned the top button of her coat with both hands and looked out at the parking lot. Elmore kept everything in writing, she said. Every arrangement he ever made with anyone. He didn't trust memory either. She looked at me. I thought you should know that. Thank you, Aunt Lorraine, I said. She squeezed my hands once and let go, and walked out to where her ride was waiting. I drove home alone. The highway was empty most of the way, and I kept both hands on the wheel and let the miles put distance between me and the parking lot and what my father had said in it, and somewhere around the county line I understood that distance was not the same thing as resolution. The third conversation was not a conversation. It was a phone call from my cousin Bev 3 months after the estate was formally transferred, on a Sunday afternoon while I was folding laundry in my apartment in Millhaven. "I just want you to know," Bev said, and her voice had the careful quality of someone delivering something they had agreed to deliver, "that people in the family are saying you gotta pay out. Like a cash settlement in exchange for your share. Is that true?" My hand stopped moving on the shirt I was folding. "No," I said. "Because that's what Uncle Gerald told Aunt Carol. He said you asked for a cash equivalent, and it was handled privately, and that's why your name isn't anywhere." I set the shirt down. "Bev," I said, "I never received a payment. I never signed a release. I never had a conversation with my father in which any of that was offered or agreed to." A silence came through the phone. "Okay," Bev said, in the tone people use when they don't know which version of events to believe and have decided not to choose. I just thought you should know what's being said. Thank you for telling me, I said. I hung up and sat down on the edge of my bed and looked at the laundry basket and did not touch it for a long time. My jaw was tight in a way that made my back teeth ache. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth and breathed through my nose until the tightness released enough to swallow. He was not just keeping me out of the estate. He was building a record. A story with texture and detail and internal consistency, the kind of story that, told enough times to enough people, becomes the version everyone remembers. Cash settlement. Walked away voluntarily. Her choice. We respected it. I had read documents like that. I had seen how a paper trail, assembled carefully over time, could make something that never happened look, on its surface, like something that obviously had. I was a paralegal. I knew exactly how this worked. What I did not know yet was that my father had been sloppy once. I called Bev back that evening. I need you to remember something, I said, in case it ever matters. Okay, she said. I never signed anything. I never received a payment. Whatever Dad told Carol, he told it the way he tells everything, with enough confidence that it doesn't occur to anyone to ask for the paperwork. Bev was quiet for a moment. What would the paperwork say? I don't know yet, I said. But I think it would say something different than what he's been saying. Another silence. Do you want me to ask him? Bev said. No, I said. Don't ask him anything. Just remember what I told you. All right, Renata, she said. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my apartment for the rest of that Sunday evening without turning on a light, watching the sky outside the window go from gray to dark, and I thought about what kind of man builds a story that carefully and what he must have known, from the beginning, about the one piece of paper that could undo it. The fourth conversation was the one that mattered. It happened at Christmas, at Phyllis's house again, and this time the table was set for the holiday, and there were children running through the hallway, and someone had put a candle arrangement in the center that smelled like cinnamon and synthetic pine. I was in the kitchen helping Phyllis with the dishes when my father came in to refill his glass and found me there. Phyllis stepped out to check on something, and for a moment it was just the two of us standing in the kitchen under the overhead light with the sound of the family in the next room. My father looked at me. Something moved across his face. Not a flinch, exactly, but something that tightened around his eyes. The look of a man who has told a story so many times he has occasionally to remind himself it is not the original. You doing all right? He asked. I'm fine, I said. Good. He filled his glass. I know this year has been hard. Losing Dad. All the family stuff. I hope you understand that what I've done was for the good of everyone. Not just Marcus.
For the whole family.
Keeping it together, keeping it intact, that's what Dad would have wanted. I rinsed a serving dish. The water was very hot, and I didn't adjust it. He told me that himself, my father added. Many times. He said Marcus was the one who understood this county, understood the land. He said some people are built to stay and some are built to go, and that both are fine, but the ones who stay are the ones who should hold the property. Did Grandpa Elmore say that? I asked. He did. When? My father paused for just a fraction of a second. Over the years. Different times. Did he put it in writing anywhere? The fraction of a second this time was longer. I said, because I handled his paperwork for 2 years before he died. His insurance appeals. His pharmacy coordination. I filed his homestead exemption for 4 consecutive years, in person, at the Harwick County Assessor's office. I know what his written instructions looked like. My father looked at me. Something in the expression shifted, not softer, but differently arranged. Renata, he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter, something almost gentle. You're a smart woman. You always have been. But sometimes smart people make things more complicated than they need to be. This is settled. The estate is settled. Let it be settled. He picked up his glass and walked back into the dining room. The hot water ran over my hands. I turned it off. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. I folded the towel back exactly as it had been. I thought about the receipt I had found in that stuck drawer in Marcus's garage. The one I had placed in my coat pocket beside Grandpa Elmore's watch without reading it fully. The one I had not told anyone about. I had been carrying it for 4 months by then. I had not opened it because my hand stopped every time I reached for it, a stillness I had learned not to examine too closely. And then, somewhere between that Christmas kitchen and the long drive home on the empty highway, I understood that I was more careful about not opening it than my father was about what it contained. That was the moment something in my chest settled, compressed from a knot into a harder, flatter thing. Something quieter and more useful. I got home to my apartment in Millhaven at 11:40 that night. I set my bag down by the door. I took off my coat. I reached into the coat pocket and felt the two things that lived there, the smooth, warm weight of Grandpa Elmore's pocket watch and the folded rectangle of lined notebook paper that had been writing next to it for 4 months. I set the watch on the kitchen counter. I set the folded paper beside it. I put the kettle on. I sat down at the kitchen table. I looked at the paper for a long time without touching it. The kettle began to sound. I got up. I poured the water. I sat back down. I reached in and took out the folded paper. I unfolded it slowly, 1/3 at a time, smoothing each crease flat with the side of my hand. I laid it flat on the table under the kitchen light. I read my father's handwriting from the top of the page to the bottom. Then I read it again. The document was not long. That was the first thing I noticed. My father's handwriting covered less than half the page, and the lines were widely spaced the way he wrote when he was being deliberate, when he wanted each word to have room to stand on its own. I had unfolded it already, in the quiet of that kitchen. I had laid it flat. I had read it once, and then again. But reading a thing in the dark of your own apartment at midnight is different from understanding it, and understanding it is different from knowing what to do with it. I did not sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers with my coat still on the chair beside the bed and Grandpa Elmore's watch on the nightstand and the unfolded paper on the kitchen table where I had left it under the light, and I looked at the ceiling and let the words arrange themselves into their proper meaning. The receipt, because that is what it was in structure and in function, even though my father had not labeled it as such, recorded a transaction. It was dated 11 years earlier, a Saturday in March, and it was written in my father's hand on a piece of lined notebook paper from the kind of pad you buy at a drugstore. It stated, in plain language, that Gerald Calloway had received from the estate account of Elmore Calloway, not yet dead at that time, not yet sick, still fully himself, a sum of $47,200, described in the document as an advance against Gerald's future inheritance share, in exchange for which Gerald agreed that his daughter, Renata Elise Calloway, would receive her proportional share of the remaining estate upon Elmore's death, uncontested, as a condition of the advance being honored. My grandfather had signed it. My father had signed it. There were 2 witness signatures I did not recognize, from people who had presumably been present at whatever kitchen table or office or neutral location this had been negotiated across. My name was in it. Not as a signatory. I had been 23 years old and living in Millhaven, and no one had told me this conversation was happening. But as a named beneficiary, specifically protected by my father's own hand, as a condition of money he had already taken. He had taken the advance. He had spent the 11 years since telling everyone I had walked away voluntarily, that I had signed off, that there had been a private cash settlement, that I had made my choice. He had written my protection into the document and then spent a decade dismantling it in every conversation he could find. I got up at 5 in the morning and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and read it a 3rd time. Then I called the attorney. The attorney was Patricia Vance, a woman I had worked adjacent to for 3 years at a firm in Millhaven before she opened her own practice on Clement Street, 2 blocks from the county courthouse. I had sent her referrals over the years. She had sent me the occasional question that needed a paralegal sigh. We trusted each other the way professionals trust each other when they have never had reason not to. I left a message at 6:15 in the morning on a Thursday. She called me back at 8:02. I read her the document over the phone. Not summarized, read it, word for word, with the handwriting described, the date confirmed, the signatures noted. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Do you have the original?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Where is it?" "On my kitchen table." "Photograph it now," she said. 3 angles, high resolution. Email them to me before you leave your apartment. And Renata, do not tell your father you have it. I haven't, I said. Good. Keep it that way. What does it mean? I asked. Legally. I want to hear you say it. Patricia was quiet for 2 seconds. That was long enough. It means he made a written promise, witnessed and signed, as a condition of receiving money from an estate he had not yet inherited, she said. And then he told everyone the promise had already been kept. I held the phone with both hands. It means, Patricia said, that you have what you need. I photographed the document. I emailed the photographs. I placed the original in a manila envelope, sealed it, and put it in the inside pocket of my work bag beside my own notepads. For 6 weeks I carried it with me every day, the way I had carried the pocket watch. The weight of it changed the way the bag sat against my hip, just slightly, and I was aware of it all the time, that slight adjustment, that small reliable pressure. During those 6 weeks before Patricia filed, I continued doing the work I had always done. For the first 2 weeks after the call with Patricia, I organized the remaining correspondence from the Harwick County Assessor regarding Grandpa Elmore's property records for parcels, each with its own deed trail, and forwarded the file to Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon, flagged by parcel and date. In the 3rd week, I retrieved the pharmacy delivery records I had kept during the 2 years of Grandpa Elmore's illness, 41 separate calls, each one logged by date and prescription in a small spiral notebook I had carried in my work bag alongside his insurance information, and added them to the timeline Patricia was building. In the 4th week, I pulled the supplemental insurance appeals I had filed on his behalf during the last 18 months of his illness, 7 separate claims, 3 of them denied initially and reversed on appeal, all handled on my lunch breaks from the parking garage at Creston and Fairweather, and made photocopies to add to the record. In the 5th week, I drove to Aunt Lorraine's house on Cutter Road on a Saturday morning, sat at her kitchen table, and went through every piece of correspondence she had kept from Grandpa Elmore, cards, notes, a single typed letter from 1994 in which he described each of his grandchildren and what he hoped for them. She let me read it. I did not take it. I read it and folded it and put it back in the envelope it had come in and handed it back to her, and she pressed my hand and said nothing. I had done the logging at the time because I was a paralegal and logging was what I did. I had not known then that I was building my own case. Patricia filed the civil claim on a Tuesday in February, 14 weeks after I found the document. The claim was narrow and specific: breach of a written agreement, unjust enrichment, interference with an inheritance right under the terms of a private instrument. No criminal allegations. No hyperbole. Just the document, the signatures, the timeline, and the money. My father was served at his house on Pelham Street on a Wednesday morning at 9:45. I knew this because Patricia's process server called her office when it was done, and Patricia called me, and I was sitting in the parking garage at Creston and Fairweather eating the same sandwich I ate most days, and I answered on the first ring. "He's been served," Patricia said. "Okay," I said. I sat in the parking garage for a while after I hung up. The concrete was cold, and the fluorescent light above my car had been flickering for as long as I could remember, and a pigeon was walking in a small determined circle near the stairwell entrance. I watched the pigeon until it found what it was looking for, which appeared to be nothing in particular, and then flew away. I finished my sandwich. I went back upstairs. I reviewed a title transfer for the Hendersons in Millhaven, a deed on a residential parcel assessed at $312,000 for $100, and a deed restriction for a property on the county line, and a trust amendment for a family I had never met, and I did my job carefully and without error, the way I always had. My father called me 3 days after he was served. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes long, and I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen in the morning before work, and then I sent the recording to Patricia, without responding to it. He called again the following Sunday. I answered that one. "Renata," he said, and his voice had a quality I had not heard from him before. Not anger, exactly, but the sound of a man whose story had developed a crack and who was looking at the crack and deciding whether it could be repaired. "I need you to understand that document was informal. It was a private family arrangement. It was never intended to be a legal instrument." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence sit. Your grandfather and I had an understanding, he said. An understanding that went beyond paperwork. You know how he was. He didn't like formality.
He signed it, Dad, I said.
He signed a lot of things. He was an old man who trusted people. Another silence. I want to ask you something, I said. He waited. When you told Bev I received a cash settlement, when you told Aunt Carol the same thing, did you believe that? Or did you know it wasn't true when you said it? The pause was long enough that I counted it. Renata, he said finally, families handle things the way they handle them. Your grandfather wanted the property to stay together. That was his wish. I honored it. That's not what I asked you. He didn't answer the question. He never answered the question. I think, my father said, and his voice had dropped into something that was almost gentle, almost the voice he used when he was trying to close a conversation kindly, that we should sit down as a family and work this out before it goes further. For the good of everyone. Not just you and me. For Marcus.
For the whole family.
Keeping it together, keeping it intact, that's what Dad would have wanted. I held the phone. I heard those words the way you hear something you have been waiting to hear, without knowing you were waiting. Okay, I said. Let's sit down. The meeting was held at Patricia Vance's office on Clement Street on a Thursday morning in late March. My father came with Marcus. They brought a family attorney named Greer, who specialized in estate mediation and who had the practice neutrality of someone paid to make things settle quietly. Patricia and I were already seated when they arrived. My father looked older to me that morning. Not fragile. Gerald Calloway was not a fragile man, but compressed the way materials compress under sustained pressure. He sat across the table from me and folded his hands and looked at me with an expression that was working very hard to be reasonable. I appreciate everyone being here, he said. I think we can resolve this without it becoming something larger than it needs to be. Patricia set a copy of the document in the center of the table. My father looked at it. Marcus looked at it. Attorney Greer looked at it with the careful blankness of a man who had already been told what was in it. That document, my father said, was a private family understanding. It was never filed. It was never formalized. It was a conversation between a father and a son, written down for clarity at the time, not intended to create legal obligations. I waited. You signed it, I said. He looked at me. I did. And you wrote it. I did. In your own hand. Renata. Attorney Greer cleared his throat. Perhaps we could focus on what a fair resolution might look like going forward, he said. Given that this is a family matter. It's a legal matter, Patricia said. Her voice was even. She did not raise it. The document is a written instrument conditioning the advance of funds from an estate account. The court will evaluate it accordingly. Greer folded his hands. Marcus looked at his father. Gerald, Marcus said, and his voice had something in it I had not heard from him before. Not accusation, but the sound of a man understanding something for the first time. Did you know Renata's name was in it? My father looked at the table. It was a different time, he said. Things were handled differently. That's not an answer, Marcus said. The room was quiet. Marcus looked at me, and I looked at him, and for a moment we were simply two people sitting across from something neither of us had asked for, and neither of us could undo. You told Bev I received a cash settlement, I said. You told Aunt Carol I asked for a cash equivalent, and it was handled privately. You told every relative who asked that I walked away voluntarily, that I signed off on my share. My father looked at his hands. Memory is funny, he said. It came out quieter this time, less certain. I reached into the folder in front of me. I took out the original receipt. I reached in and lifted it out by the edges, the way you handle something that is weight beyond its paper. I unfolded it slowly, one section at a time, smoothing each crease flat with the side of my hand. I laid it flat on the table in the center of the room, where everyone could see my father's handwriting, the signatures, the date. No one at the table spoke. I took out a second document. Not the receipt, a separate page, a timeline I had prepared with Patricia's guidance, 12 months of records. The phone calls with the insurance provider, the homestead exemption filings, the property record confirmations with a Harwood County assessor, the weekend drives to Dunfield, the donation center coordination, the pharmacy deliveries. The dates and the names and the specifics of 11 years of labor no one had acknowledged or recorded anywhere except in my own careful memory. I unfolded it slowly, one section at a time, and laid it flat on the table next to the receipt. Then I looked at my father. "You said I walked away voluntarily," I said. "I drove to Dunfield every third weekend for 3 years before Grandpa got sick, and every third weekend through both years of his illness." My father said nothing. "You said some people are built to stay and some are built to go," I said. I coordinated his medical paperwork, his pharmacy deliveries, and his insurance appeals for 2 years on my lunch breaks. The room was very still. "You said keeping it together, keeping it intact was what Dad would have wanted," I said. "You signed a document promising him that I would receive my share. And then you spent 11 years telling everyone I had already been taken care of." No one at the table spoke. I gathered the documents, the receipt, the timeline, the photographs Patricia had printed as backup. I stacked them evenly, edges aligned, the way I had stacked documents for 11 years in a professional setting where precision was not optional. I picked up the papers. I stood. I walked to the door of Patricia Vance's office on Clement Street, and I opened it, and I went through it, and I did not slam it behind me. The settlement was reached 6 weeks later. I'm not going to tell you the exact figure because some things are between a family and its attorneys and a room full of people who will never fully agree on what happened or why. What I will tell you is that Patricia described it as appropriate and that it was more than my father had intended to give and less than he would have paid if it had gone further. Marcus called me once during the 6 weeks. He did not say much. He said he hadn't known about the document, which I believed, because Marcus was not a man who kept secrets so much as a man who did not ask questions. He said he was sorry, which he said the way people say it when they mean something adjacent to sorry, regret, maybe, or discomfort, or the wish that a particular set of facts had arranged themselves differently. "I should have asked," he said. "When things were being settled, I should have asked where your name was." "You were doing what Dad told you to do?" I said. "That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It's not. But I believe you didn't know." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about Grandpa's watch," he said. "He used to show it to me when I was little. He said it was going to someone who needed it." I said nothing. "I think he meant you," Marcus said. I thanked him for calling. We didn't speak again for several months after that. My father did not call. I did not expect him to. I still have Grandpa Elmore's pocket watch. I carry it every day in the left pocket of whatever coat I am wearing, and sometimes on long drives or quiet mornings I reach in and hold it without opening it, feeling the weight and the warmth and the worn smoothness of the case where his thumb used to rest. I think about what he knew and didn't know. I think about whether he understood, in his final years, what the document he had signed meant, or whether he trusted that the trust itself would hold, that a father's written word to another father would be enough. I think he believed in the written word the way men of his generation often did, with a faith that was not naive so much as deliberate, a choice to believe that things put down on paper stay where you put them. He was mostly right. It just took 11 years and a stuck drawer and a parking lot outside a Sunoco on Route 9 for the paper to find its way back to the right hands. I think about Aunt Lorraine sometimes. The way she asked twice to see the will at that first meeting. The way she said, in the vestibule of the church on that November Sunday, that Elmore kept everything in writing and didn't trust memory either. She had known. Not the specifics, she was 83 and had not been in those rooms, but she had understood, the way people who have lived long enough understand things they cannot prove, that something in the arrangement was not what it appeared to be. I called her the week after the settlement was reached. I drove to her house on Cutter Road on a Saturday morning, the same drive I had made dozens of times in the years of Grandpa Elmore's illness, and I sat at her kitchen table and told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. When I finished, she folded her hands on the table the same way she had folded them at Phyllis's dining room in the weeks after the funeral. "Your grandfather would have wanted you to know," she said. "He asked me once, toward the end, if I thought the family would hold together. I told him families always find their shape eventually." She looked out the window. I meant it as a comfort. I didn't know it would take this long. I drove home with the heater on high and both hands on the wheel, and the pocket watch in my left coat pocket, the same as always, the weight of it familiar against my hip. Here is what I know now that I did not know at 34. A story told consistently, with warmth and detail and the appearance of regret, can feel more like truth than the truth itself. People believe stories that are offered to them with apparent sorrow. She made her choice. We respected it. That's just how it went. That sentence has the rhythm of something painful and honest. It does not have the rhythm of a lie. And that is exactly why it works. What it cannot survive is paper. Paper does not have rhythm. Paper does not offer its version with warmth or apparent sorrow. Paper just says what it says, in the hand of the person who wrote it, on the date it was written, and it waits. It waits in the bottom of a stuck drawer for 8 months or 8 years or longer, and then someone with cold hands and a need to understand unsticks the drawer and finds it, and the waiting is over. My grandfather put my name in a document because he wanted to make sure I was protected. He did not tell me about it because he trusted the people around him to honor it without being reminded. That trust was misplaced. But the document was not. That is the thing about paper. It is more patient than people. It outlasts the stories told about it. It does not need anyone to believe in it. It just needs to be found. That's my story. A folded piece of notebook paper in a stuck drawer in a garage in Harwick County. A pocket watch worn smooth on the left side where an old man used to press his thumb. A parking lot outside a Sunoco on Route 9 where I sat with the engine running for 20 minutes until I could think straight. Those are the 3 things I come back to when I think about this. Not the meeting in the attorney's office, not the settlement, not any of the larger things that came after. Those 3 small things. The paper,
The watch.
the parking lot. If you are sitting with something similar right now, if someone in your family is telling a version of events that doesn't match what you know to be true, if you've been quiet for a long time because you believe the story might correct itself, if you've been carrying something in your pocket and not opening it because you were afraid of what it would say, take this as your sign. Open the drawer. Read the document. Find someone you trust and let them help you understand what you are actually holding. You may find out you were right all along. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is being told a story about themselves that doesn't belong to them. They may need to be reminded that paper is patient and that the truth does not expire. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever found something, a document, a letter, a record of any kind, that changed the way you understood your own story? I read every one. Hit subscribe if you're new here. There are more of these stories, and every one of them is about someone who stayed calm when they had every reason not to. I'll see you in the next one.